Welcome to Taming Disaster with Drones for Good podcast, presented by Aeros, part of GE Aviation, with additional financial support from First Eyes and Pix4D. Tune in for in-depth interviews, one-of-a-kind perspectives, and insightful conversations with industry leaders who are using drones to help prepare for, respond to, and recover from complex emergencies and major disasters around the world. And now, from the AIRT Studios in Miami, Florida, the heart of Hurricane Alley, here is your host, Christopher Todd.
Welcome to another edition of Taming Disaster. We have a great program lined up for you today. As we see the unmanned systems industry evolving, we see different states taking different strategies on how they're going to use these systems to help not only their citizens, but build commerce, build business within the state. And it's been really interesting to watch Texas, North Dakota, Nevada, North Carolina, and see some of these early leaders kind of come out and what strategies they've been using to build visibility for these programs within their state. And so what we're going to do today is go to a state that you're probably just starting to hear about when it comes to unmanned systems, and that's the state of Pennsylvania. We're going to be joined by our guest this week, Dabid Heath. He is the executive director and co-founder of the Pennsylvania Drone Association. David, welcome to Taming Disaster.
Thanks for having me, Chris. I'm glad to be here.
All right. So for those who follow the podcast, they know I always start off asking, how did you first get involved in unmanned systems?
Well, for me, it's kind of a unique story, and actually it kind of fell in my lap. So my background is I actually went to Penn State where I studied energy engineering. And while I was at school, I had a part-time job with United Airlines at the time, and really started seeing my love for aviation really kind of blossom while I was in college. I mean, growing up, my dad, who had his private pilot's license, I'd go flying up with him in his Cessnas, and really took a big love for aviation and really seeing the direction that aviation was headed. So I began to work my way up through the ranks within commercial aviation, so with United Airlines, and then ultimately ending up with Delta Airlines and working my way actually all across the country. So mostly in Pennsylvania, starting in State College and then moving to Harrisburg. And I found myself actually in Tulsa, Oklahoma, being the general manager for the entire Delta operations at that station. Had really a lot of experience more managing people, trying to deal with all ends from regulatory spectrums to just normal HR day-to-day operations. And whenever it comes to managing people, that's really what an association does. And so I was trying to find my way back home to Pennsylvania, to find a good place to be able to help assist my parents and really be closer to home where I was raised. And I had a very good relationship actually with the Aviation Council of Pennsylvania, which is mostly made up of manned aviation as well as engineering firms, that kind of front. And they started seeing an influx of unmanned systems starting to join their association. And they didn't really believe that unmanned and their mission really, although they share common goals, is that they really thought that it needed an independent association to really help raise their issues. And so in my relationship with ACP and my background in aviation, they thought that, David, what do you think about coming on board and really taking unmanned systems underneath your arm and really trying to elevate that within Pennsylvania and work collaboratively with ACP and PA Drone. And so actually in February of 2019 is whenever ACP officially spun us out, and I was able to make my way back to Pennsylvania and come on board and really help strategize Pennsylvania towards moving that forward.
So local boy comes home to help build the unmanned systems industry in the great state of Pennsylvania. Is that kind of the headline there?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
All right. So I've got to tell you, I mean, I've got a certain affinity in my heart for Pennsylvania. I've been through it a couple times. I've been in Philadelphia. I've been in, God, where else have I been? I can't
Pittsburgh,
even
probably.
think, possibly, yeah. But what's really interesting is my family lineage goes all the way back to Pennsylvania, to Hanover County, which I've vowed at some point I'm going to go to. And they say in 1640, Hugh Todd came over from Ireland, smuggled out during the religious controversy in a pickle barrel, and made his way to the United States to Pennsylvania. And that the local preacher in Hanover County said the reason the Todd disposition is so sweet is because Hugh Todd came. No, it was a molasses barrel, I think. So, anyways, I'm about an 11th generation American with my roots coming back to Pennsylvania. So it's really interesting for me to be talking to you today because I'm curious to learn about what's happening in Pennsylvania, knowing that my family kind of came out of that region originally here in the U.S. So, you talked a little bit about the Pennsylvania Drone Association being spun out in 2019. That's a really late start compared to what some of these other states have done, and kind of the head start you could argue that they have on you. Is that a benefit that you've been able to kind of see what's already been done and the mistakes that have been made and the successes, or does that put you kind of behind the eight ball and that you've got to play catch up? I mean, what's your thought on that, and what kind of strategy are you invoking because of that?
And it's a very good point, and one that I actually bring up in a lot of my meetings up at our Capitol. It's twofold. So yes, Pennsylvania is behind. We are surrounded by a lot of states with a lot of great initiatives. We have New Era to the north. We got the Mid-Atlantic Aviation Partnership to the south. We have Ohio with their 33-mile SMART corridor. To the west, we have the National Institute of Aerospace and the FAA Tech Center. Over in New Jersey, we have the Maryland test site, and we have a lot of great stuff happening around. And so the point that I like to bring up to our legislators is, although we are behind, it does give us a strategic advantage. And that is that we're not the ones blazing the trails and making mistakes as we go on. Is we can learn from what other states have done and take that education and help develop Pennsylvania into a more idealized program to really help elevate Pennsylvania and take those next steps forward.
So has it been hard to kind of get this issue on the radar of legislators? I mean, I know, here in Florida, the legislators are so busy and they've got really staunch positions. Either they seem to have an affinity for unmanned systems, or they want nothing to do with unmanned systems. And a lot of it has to go with their constituents and kind of what the local vibe is in their area. But what have you seen in Pennsylvania along those lines?
From our standpoint, our General Assembly is very, very much pro unmanned systems. They're just looking for the direction. They're looking for the experts. They're looking for the people to help drive them and tell them exactly what it is that we need. And that's where my role is very valuable, is because my role is to connect them with the experts. I like to say that, I am not the experts of drones, but I am the manager of all the experts, and I can help bring them in and help educate them about all the different ends that we need to help drive them forward. We're very fortunate that we have a wealth of universities. We have a wealth of companies based in Pennsylvania that are really taking the lead nationally and are just waiting for the right vehicle to be able to help spread that word and be able to educate our key decision makers about what Pennsylvania needs to do in order to succeed.
So internally, who are some of the companies in Pennsylvania that you could point to that you think are really emblematic of where the state's headed in the unmanned systems industry and are really working to help put Pennsylvania on the map at this point?
Well, two really big companies that are big in the standards realm. So one is being ASTM International. So ASTM is actually based in West Conshohocken, Pennsylvania, and have a lot of Penn State grads and people living within the state that are really helping drive things forward. I know Phil actually lives in Maryland, but still we're working towards helping elevate them. Another company being the Padina Group, John Walker being the chair for ISO for UAS is another very valuable asset. Additionally, we have USS supplier. So One Sky is based here in Exton, Pennsylvania. We also have companies like Near Earth Autonomy, which is a spin out of Carnegie Mellon, based on the west side. We have a lot of drone as a service providers that are starting to pop up. Connexicor is up in northeastern Pennsylvania, and they spread actually nationwide. Additionally, we have other universities, so Penn, Drexel, and Assure program, and even small community colleges are really starting to take the lead and start pushing things forward. I find the most unique part is that companies, although they are not based in Pennsylvania. So a great initial startup, actually Dart Drones, was originally a Pennsylvania company up in the Scranton area for those Office fans. But Abby actually had to move out to Utah, but they still left a lot of their employees around in Pennsylvania and still are able to collaborate with us as well. And so we just keep finding more and more. We have employees from Measure that are in Pennsylvania, employees that are with AirMap in Pennsylvania, and just utilizing those assets because all the remote work that's happening, utilizing the assets that are right here within the Commonwealth to be able to help drive things forward.
Yeah, so you definitely have a lot of talent, a lot of pieces in place, some great university systems. I know Penn State has been starting to put itself on the map with some of the work they're doing in the unmanned systems realm, which is great to see. And I'm glad you mentioned ASTM because, as you know, many of the listeners probably know, we recently announced a partnership with ASTM with our drone responders program, where we're going to be basically the auditing public safety programs for compliance with the ASTM standards. So that's something that we're getting ready to roll out, but maybe that'll be the key that gets me up to Pennsylvania sooner rather than later, as soon as this coronavirus pandemic goes by the wayside. So how hard is it from your position as executive director for the Pennsylvania Drone Association to marshal all of these different constituents under a common umbrella and get them kind of working with the same common vision, the same direction? Because, I mean, obviously they've got slightly different goals and nuances, so it can be challenging to get them to buy into a statewide vision where for the greater good, when they've all got specific objectives that they've got to meet. So how are you tackling that at this point?
Well, I like to tell our members and potential members and people that are becoming involved with the association is that states are really playing a key role whenever it comes to developing unmanned technology. Obviously, the federal jurisdiction, it is the FAA's airspace, but states that are really succeeding are setting up leasing routes and setting up these routes for beyond visual line of sight corridors to be developed. So from the value of a state is that we are smaller than obviously the nationwide approach and what the FAA is working on. And so we can really vary our membership from small individual Part 107, you can even recreational flyers, all the way up to class 3, 4, 5 manufacturers like Navmar Applied Sciences, and trying to see what those commonalities are between all of them. And one very big piece is making sure that UAS is in the eyes of our state and making sure that they're making the right decisions as things go through. So Pennsylvania actually only has one UAS law in place. And it's Act 78, covers 4 main parts: privacy, protection, can't deliver contraband to prisons. But as we see, the most valuable piece is state level preemption. And pretty much everyone can really get on board with seeing the value of not having patchwork legislation throughout Pennsylvania. We have over 2,500 municipalities within the state. And if we have 2,500 different sets of rules and regulations for UAS, it's just going to overcomplicate things, because even as we look at it right now, our lands providers and everyone else are pulling that information from the federal level. I mean, we have some municipalities that aren't even online, and you'd have to go to the local municipal building to find out if there's rules and regulations, if there's no signs posted. And so having that commonality. But the statewide approach is very much strategic in my standpoint, is because on the national level, we have organizations like Drone Responders very focused on public safety. We have AVSI, who's very much focusing on the commercial utilization of autonomous systems. We have AOPA, who's focused on pilots. We have AMA, who's focused on the recreational pilots. And to be able to scale it down and wash it down to a state focus with common interest throughout all of them is where we see our value, is that a state's approach can be vast, as opposed to a federal approach or even global approach, is that we're able to cast our net much wider and be able to encompass all those different companies into one geographic location within Pennsylvania. And with COVID and everything happening right now, people aren't traveling about and seeing that strategic advantage of having a geo center and in Pennsylvania with all the greatness around us really allows us to elevate Pennsylvania and gain more members.
So what would you say has been the greatest challenge in putting all these pieces together? I mean, in some areas it's privacy groups, it's civil liberties groups that feel that drones are obtrusive. I mean, what stumbling blocks have you come across that you've kind of had to push your way through or overcome at this point?
So we have successfully, I mentioned state level preemption, and actually that only became law in October is whenever it was passed. So actually in February, the month before we were founded, is when it became law. And since February of 2019, it's actually been challenged twice. And it's specifically our municipal organizations, our township supervisors, our county commissioners, all come together because they want to be able to have more regulating power, which is inherent in any government body is they want to be able to regulate more and more and more. And so even whenever we're at the state level saying you can't regulate the airspace, they don't like hearing that. Just like telling a mayor or a county commissioner that, you can't regulate this because we have state level preemption. And so we've seen that come across, and we've been able to really educate our legislators about the value of having preemption, not having patchwork legislation. That's probably our number one priority that we're always looking out for, is defending that piece of legislation. And not just defending, but we're going a little bit on the proactive approach, a little bit offensive, is saying that local municipalities that had regulations for UAS prior to our preemption passing, is that is no longer valid because we have state level preemption. And we're actually being a little bit proactive. So like Allegheny County Parks, which is where Pittsburgh is located, has a ban on drones. But if you follow the NCDO case up in Michigan, the same type of laws were challenged, and case law was created upholding state level preemption. And so we took that and are really trying to be more proactive and allow for safe operation and opening up of areas to provide more opportunities for our flyers within the state.
Gotcha. And so, you mentioned New Air, you mentioned Ohio, some of the different organizations that surround Pennsylvania. Which do you kind of look at as far as like, who's your main competition at this point, or who are you guys saying we need to keep pace with these guys or we're going to be in trouble? Is there anyone out there like that?
Well, we've done a lot of research looking at what different states are doing, what different test sites have done. Out of the 7 FAA test sites, only 2 are state sponsored as opposed to individually. So like Mid-Atlantic Aviation Partnership is Virginia Tech. But looking at New Air, we very much like what they've done, because that's state level investment, although it is not directly a state site. It's showing how state dollars can really drive industry and bring that up. Our goal is really to elevate the industry. I like the saying that, rising tide floats all boats. We are the tide. We are not trying to push one thing over the other. We're just trying to elevate unmanned systems. So with universities that we mentioned earlier as well, I know that Penn State actually has a test site that they're operating. It's not tied in with the FAA right now, but are starting to drive industry in that way, and looking at other test sites that are popping up. We're more trying to, rather than generate our own, is complement the ones that exist. So I mentioned the National Institute of Aerospace out in Cape May County. What they're doing is we're trying to open up Pennsylvania to tie in, make those cross-state routes, look at New Air coming down into Pennsylvania, or looking at Ohio coming into Pennsylvania, or Virginia, or Maryland, because we truly are the keystone. We are surrounded by all of this great stuff, and to be able to access the Northeast properly and really make things viable for the future of the industry is that we see actually a collaborative approach between all of them.
Makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned the colleges and universities again. How important is it to have academia part of the conversation? I mean, there's a lot of great schools in Pennsylvania. Is that putting you at an advantage to have those close ties with the universities?
It's valuable to a point. So academia is actually very siloed. It is very difficult to say whenever you're talking to one person at Penn State or one person at Penn, and you're talking to a different person there, you're talking to two different entities that really operate. And so to get academia to really get on board has actually been a big challenge of ours. I mean, if you say you're with one university, the other university is offended, rather than create a collaborative platform for them to be able to communicate across. And that's what we're trying to do from the association standpoint, is get all of these think tanks together. I mean, Carnegie Mellon is, if not the best robotics university in the country, as well as Penn in their Air Lab. I mean, all of them are starting to have spin out companies. And so we've actually found our way in through those spin out companies, is because the professors that are working with the university are also working for those companies and finding the strategic advantage is really trying to tie their companies and the universities together and allow for them to elevate collaboratively.
You mentioned funding earlier, and especially with New Era, how they're set up for private-public partnership. I mean, that seems to be kind of the key driver for any UAS program, project, state level, local level, federal level, private, public. How have you been able to get the funding resources you need to help drive this movement in Pennsylvania?
So it's twofold. Obviously, states need to invest a little, and we're actually working on providing that opportunity from a state level approach, not for funding the association, but for funding projects, funding infrastructure, funding programs. We look at the state from that standpoint, but we're also looking at the industry to invest a little bit into the association to help provide these opportunities for them to come in and really mark their flag, put their flag post in Pennsylvania and say that we're really moving things forward. It's usually, are we, if you build it, they will come mentality, or whether or not it's, if you all come together, then we will build it. And that's really, it is a challenge. And who with the state is really going to take that lead? Is it going to be our Department of Transportation? Is it going to be our Emergency Management Agency? Is it going to be the Department of General Services? And where does that really fit? So that's our first goal, is truly landing a UAS program center within the state. More than likely, it'll be our Department of Transportation. Which entity underneath the Department of Transportation is all in the fine print and what we're working through right now. What we do have is the support of our General Assembly to really help us drive that and make sure that we are replicating and making sure that we are using the right pieces to really do that. Funding is obviously the issue with everyone. I mean, I'm sure you see that in the public safety realm is the more money you can pump into it, the more opportunities we can create. But at the same time, even with COVID now and the repercussions of that, is trying to get more investment dollars from the industry as well as from the state is obviously a big challenge.
Yeah, and a lot of folks don't really understand that associations do require funding to be successful, because you've got to make a living. I mean, staff's got to make a living, and somebody's got to answer the phones and conduct all the little tasks that any organization requires to be successful. So you've got members then providing the backbone of support for the association, and then additional funding coming in for different projects, if I heard you correctly. Is that accurate?
Yes. So we do have our membership base, which helps fund a piece. The other piece, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit, is our conference. We think that will really help us keep driving forward and creating programs. We've also really tried to share our work. We're not siloed by any means. Is we open up our arms to as many organizations as possible to be able to utilize assets that they may have, being around for 20, 30 plus years, and be able to help build and leverage our membership and our members by utilizing infrastructure that they've put in place. It's just making the vehicle, making the boat, or whatever you will, to be able to allow for the most collaboration and the most synergy as possible between those organizations. So I know I mentioned ACP at the beginning. ACP has been fantastic to us, as well as looking at national level organizations such as drone responders or AMA or AOPA, is seeing that, if they have, like AOPA has over 300,000 members, AOPA has over 200,000, and AMA has over 300,000 members. We know that they are better suited to handle our recreational pilots and be able to elevate them more and give them more programs, and so duplicate those programs. Additionally, we look at signing different MOUs across to be able to elevate other programs that may be existing that we strongly believe in or support, and be able to just collect a little bit by getting administrative costs to be able to put on their programs within our state, and really kind of sharing it all around. It's not a one-man show. It's not just the PA Drone Association show. It is the industry as a whole, and that's not the PA Drone Association. It's not AUVSI. It's not AMA. It's all of us together, and to be able to crowdsource it that way has been successful for us as well.
Gotcha. And I want to get to the PA Drone Symposium in a second, but you mentioned a really interesting point. I mean, you've got Department of Transportation, Emergency Management, both actively, engaged with the association to build a future for unmanned systems in Pennsylvania. You've got academia, you've got industry, and it's from my experience, as you're building an association, at first you're trying to find that traction, and then eventually you hit kind of the tipping point where everybody's coming in. But at that point, it becomes really difficult because you've got all these different constituents with slightly different nuanced needs that you want to assist and make sure that you're on point with them. But it becomes challenging because it starts, exponentially expanding. Is that something you've run into at this point, or have you been able to manage that process so far?
I think my biggest point is to try to save Switzerland as much as possible, is try to help support them and in all their individual efforts as much as possible. But the value that we bring is connections, networking, and that's networking mostly with our state capital, with our agencies, with our General Assembly. We have organizations that are so like Exxon Technologies. They are very much their technologies utilize in mine mapping. So what did I do? I connected them with our Department of Environmental Protection, their Deputy Secretary of Mining, active and abandoned mines, so that they could have mines to test their products as well. That's something that I'm working on right now, is just opening up the door. My job is a glorified bellman, I guess, is just trying to open up the door for each of those entities.
All right. So you're really, your primary role then is just connecting the dots and making sure everyone's kind of, accomplishing the goals they need at the micro level. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Okay.
Connecting at the micro level, but thinking at the macro level. Really trying to tie in. So like we've been very involved with the FAA UAS Integration Office, trying to connect them with our Department of Transportation, being able to open up eyes to what the future of unmanned systems technology is, what's happening today, what needs to happen in order for things to progress in the next 5, 10, 20 years, which is very much the macro approach. But on the micro level, from a member standpoint, is hearing what their needs are and being able to open those doors and allow for them to have opportunities. Additionally, we are working on programs, so in partnership. So like our state system of higher education, which is 14 public universities. We partnered with the Unmanned Safety Institute and are working with them to help create a non-credit drone training program. And what that really looks like, we're still in the planning phases for that, but allowing for that type of opportunity as well.
All right. So yeah, I want to shift gears slightly before we get into the conference. And I want to just get an understanding of the level to which public safety agencies in Pennsylvania are using unmanned systems. Are you seeing UAS used by departments? Are they embracing it, or are they still kind of kicking the tires trying to figure out what the strategy is going to be?
I think in one of our previous conversations, your description of utilization, associating it to microbreweries, is like one of my favorite analogies, and my new analogy that I'm going to use all the time. It's very much pockets of utilization. So, for instance, like Philadelphia, they actually, underneath the Philadelphia Emergency Management Agency, have their own actually drone education task force that they work on. They're looking at UAS detection and mitigation. And we have companies out in like Pittsburgh. I know that we have a member company that actually provides drone as a service. They're actually on-call UAS providers as opposed to internal programs. We have now we have public safety entities actually reaching out to the association saying, "Hey, we want to build a training program, drone program. What are our steps?" And we help direct them. Actually, we direct them to drone responders and help connect the dots and allow them. So it's very much segmented. And what we are trying to do in collaboration with Pima is create a flat level, essentially bring what you're doing with drone responders into Pennsylvania on a statewide approach. We are kind of segmented. Unique things in Pennsylvania, like, so our state police are actually a subsidiary of our Department of Transportation. They're not within the emergency management profile. They're kind of their own individual entity. And we have individual municipal police authorities as well that are starting to build. But what I'm finding, like even in my local town where I live, is that even the governing bodies are starting to see the value of this and are starting to allocate funds. It was actually in a conversation with my local mayor that he said, yeah, we actually chunked out funding for a UAS program, but they haven't done anything with it yet. And that's actually a very unique approach. Is not too often do you say that there's funding for something and not have it created yet. And so we're just trying to make sure that we connect those dots and have a collaborative platform, a voluntary collaborative platform for everyone to get on and get on the same page, because each unique use case scenario is very much dependent on the geographic location. A very rural town will operate very differently than a class 1 city. In trying to find how we can help create a good baseline for them and be able to disseminate that outwards.
Yeah, and you know, I also want to ask you, are you seeing any pushback from the manned aviation community, either on the public side, public aviation programs for public safety, or on the private side from airports? They're like, what are you doing with these drones? I mean, this is going to cause problems, because we're seeing that in different parts of the U.S. I think typically we're able to overcome those options, but or objections. But what's the climate like in Pennsylvania for those?
Oh, that's actually a very good question, especially with our relationship with ACP. And actually, initially, our initial spin out was because we weren't seeing eye to eye. They weren't looking at integrating drones. They were looking more at keeping drones out. And it's kind of a very blended approach, and I think they're very much changing their minds. We have 125, 128 licensed airports in Pennsylvania, and we're seeing some really adopt. The Penn State test site, for instance, actually lives at a small general aviation airport right outside of State College. And so we can see that possibility of growing, but we also are dealing with, and they cite all the different things, whether it's Gatwick or Newark or what have you, that we do see opposition. But my answer to that is not legislation. It's looking at how do we have technological solutions, because I don't want drones flying near critical infrastructure, airports, anything like that, just as much as the next person. We don't want any nefarious users, but making sure that we educate them about what's happening at the federal level, what's happening within the industry. How are we answering these questions? Is it geofencing? Is it passive detection? What type of considerations are being looked at? And fortunately, we're seeing positive moves. So like Pittsburgh International, for instance, actually had a drone incursion program that they generated. They said, okay, if a drone was to come, what do we do? What steps do we take? Which agencies are called? Because for them, they actually have an issue that they have 55 different public safety departments that would respond to a call if they were to actually open it up, because there are so many municipalities that surround that area. And who gets called? How do we organize this? And those types of considerations are very much so. Don't quote me on the 55. I know it's an astronomical number. I think it's about. In my conversations, it's a lot.
It's a lot. Yeah.
They have a lot. which is why I know, for instance, that they have, because that's just not, I mean, that's fire, EMS, police, plus everything, county, state, all the different response agencies, is that they actually have 11 different municipalities that just surround that airport. And so these types of considerations are very unique to Pennsylvania. We're very much like an onion, and you got to peel back the different layers and be able to work it out. Is that we don't see any other state that has that level of complexity to be able to work it properly, which is why baseline standards, baseline programs to get everyone on the same playing field is so valuable in our state, particularly, rather than having, this municipality really leveraging up or vice versa.
Yeah, and to be able to kind of put all those pieces in place, again, going back to the proper sequence, you kind of hit on it. It takes education and making sure that people are informed and overcoming opinions that might not be accurate. And I would guess that that's probably one of the catalysts behind the Pennsylvania Drone Symposium. Can you tell us a little bit about how the symposium came to fruition and what the objective is for the event at this point?
Yeah, so we initially were planning an in-person, and then COVID hit, and then we had to veer and go virtual. So end of this month, September 29th through October 1st. But the number one goal of the symposium is actually to educate our key decision makers. So whenever I was initially creating the program, I reached out to PEMA, our emergency management agency, and I reached out to PennDOT, and with them, I actually generated 4 specific sessions for each of them, and then we filled in the rest. We have 15 sessions, so that left the Drone Association with 7, because we wanted to see what our executive agencies really wanted to look at. And executive agencies are very much probably the biggest challenge to deal with, because they have such strict protocols in place. Developing a public-private partnership with an executive agency requires formality. It requires different type of procurement methods, and how do we generate this P3, and how do we really operate? How do we work together? And so the purpose of the conference was really to be able to educate without having formalities in place. Is say, let me put the experts in front of you. Let me find out what questions you have. So I actually gave free attendance to every single member of our General Assembly. So 253 members of our General Assembly will have access to this information from the experts, so that whenever they see drones or UAS or automated technologies come across their desk, they know who the experts are. Who was I listening to on that session? Who was talking about public safety and really working on things? We have participation from very much a nationwide reach, from software companies to manufacturers to drone solutions providers to drone as a service providers to public safety entities to the FAA to, we're trying to cast a very wide net to be able to educate those laymen as well as those that are involved in the industry to really elevate them. So blending topics and discussions from very much a 30,000 foot view, but at the same time, getting down into the nitty gritty to be able to bring value to our members and bring value to those that know about the industry and want to build upon it.
And I think it's really exciting. I mean, people are many people are lamenting about the fact, well, COVID-19 has really put a damper on these events because everything's gone virtual and we don't get the live interaction and the networking. And there's a lot to be said for that. I mean, we've done numerous events now, and it's not the same. But there is a silver lining in some places. And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head in that it allows you to bring in people from all parts of the nation, even the world, if you want to, who don't have to pay the travel costs, who wouldn't be able to come to a regional event because it just might not have enough attendance to really warrant that type of investment. And we saw that firsthand with our UAS drones disaster conferences with Miami and Los Angeles. We were able to build those up, but it was a struggle to get some of the bigger name folks to come in because it was a new event. And for a couple hundred people, it was just really at the cutoff of whether or not they were going to get any ROI on it. But with the virtual side now, it's easy for these different types of sponsors and solution providers to want to participate in these events because it's a virtual couple hours of their day. So it's an easy lift. Are you seeing that kind of play out with the planning for your conference? I mean, are you seeing some of the sponsors and some of the vendors come in that you wouldn't have expected maybe to come if it was going to be a live event at this point?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have participation globally. So I know we have a company from Israel that's participating. We have companies from California participating. We have companies from Utah, Colorado, Florida, North Carolina. We have 4 departments of transportation from across the nation: Utah, North Carolina, Alabama, Ohio, all participating. And so to be able to open up that door has been extremely valuable. But it's also because we are new, this is our first conference, is we had so much planning on this regional focus to be able to think outside of the box, even looking at just the start time of the conference. Because we have California companies involved, you have to think about West Coast time, considerations that you normally don't take into place whenever you're developing an in-person conference, because you assume everyone will be there, and seeing how that hybrid approach that is going to more than likely be how things are progressing is you will have this joint virtual in-person conference as COVID progresses, and the considerations that need to be taken in place. I'm so appreciative that we are able to get involvements from our sponsors like DJI, Skydio, Pix4D, RMUS, Drone Up, AT&T. These are big name companies that albeit they're not based in Pennsylvania, see the value of being present to be able to help educate our key decision makers and those within the Commonwealth, and be able to drive industry to come to Pennsylvania, short of a plane trip and hotel accommodations. Now they're able to be here at the click of the button and be in front of the people that make the tough decisions for the state, and I think that's invaluable.
So for the listener out there who might be thinking, okay, it's another drone conference. What is going to make the Pennsylvania Drone Symposium different than the other events? What would be the value proposition that you would offer to someone?
I think the value proposition is because it's state-centric. Although it's Pennsylvania-centric, it's still the end goal is what can states do to be successful, and that is very much a generality. It's not just Pennsylvania; it could be Iowa or Illinois or whatever, what have you. Is that we are looking at specifically a state's approach. We're talking holistically. We're talking about what's happening within the nation, but how do states position themselves to become successful? And that's just not the key decision makers as well. It's because we are unique. I don't think there's an organization exactly like ours. I mean, there's similar ones in different states, but we are very much taking it from the state's approach. How do we take the information that's happening globally, nationally, and take it down to a state level approach and even local approach, and get everyone on the same playing field within the same vehicle and communicating at that same level. I think that's one of the big value added is because we're taking a local approach, it is very much able to be repeatable. So what's happening on the national sphere is happening at the national sphere. Other countries may look, but you can't take what the FAA is doing and do the same thing at the state level. It's the FAA's job to do that. But a state's Department of Transportation or a state's General Assembly or a state-specific industry or even an individual operator can say, well, if our state does this, we can be successful. And that's what I want to see the big takeaway from.
Awesome. So, David, really quick, what are the dates, the price, and where can people go to get more information or to register for the Pennsylvania Drone Symposium?
So the dates are September 29th through October 1st. The full conference registration, so it's a 3-day event. The full conference registration is $200, but we are serving several discounts. And so I'll give out one of the generic ones. So member 50, if you use member 50, you get $50 off. If you just want to do an individual day, It is $100 per day, or you can, if you just want to do a la carte, you can do individual sessions. Like I mentioned, we have 15 different sessions, three keynote sessions, so 18 total, $25 per session. If you just want to see, if you're a public safety entity, just want to see those 4 individual public safety sessions, you just sign up for those 4 and you don't get the whole deal. But with the $50 off, $150 for 3 days for the same level of presenters that you see at the Commercial UAV Expo or Exponential or anything like that, with a state level approach, a local thinking process. I think it's a knockout of the park, and would be great for not people just in Pennsylvania, but anyone across the country to join in.
And what's the URL people should go to?
Go ahead and go to padrone.org/events.
padrone.org/events.
Yep, and it'll be right there, and that'll take you right to the event website.
All right, David, we're actually at time. Any final closing thoughts you'd like to leave with the audience?
I think a great process will be to see how the association develops and Pennsylvania develops, and Pennsylvania becoming a part of the conversation across the country. We are always looking at what states are being successful, whether it's North Dakota or New York or North Carolina. And my goal is to see Pennsylvania up and in competition with all those other states as well, and being part of that conversation. And it couldn't be done without the industry and the industry support. So I want to thank my members. I want to thank all the organizations. And thank you, Chris, for having me on today to help spread the word about what Pennsylvania is doing next in the UAS realm.
Well, David, thank you for joining us this week on Taming Disaster, and we certainly hope you'll come back again some point in the future and we can revisit the success of the Pennsylvania Drone Symposium and see where the state's headed.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris.
All right, David Heath, Executive Director and Co-founder of the Pennsylvania Drone Association. Thank you for joining us this week. We'll see you next time on Taming Disaster.
Thank you for listening to Taming Disaster, a production of AIRT, the world's leading nonprofit organization supporting drones for good. Learn more about us online at airt.ngo. And be sure to tune in to our public safety focused podcast, Drone Responders, hosted by Charles Werner.